Hi friends, I'm Sylvia and I'm a priest in the Diocese of the Rio Grande, and today I want to share about how song and chant are important prayer practices for me. So I have been singing all my life since I was a little kid, and my parents would buy us these cassette tapes called Kids Praise, to singing in children's choir, to singing hymns at church. I've been singing my whole life, and it is a really critical way that I connect with God, and that God speaks to me and I speak to God, and God continues to form me more and more into the person I'm supposed to be. Whether it's singing hymns or singing in the car, there are infinite numbers of ways that music can be a spiritual practice, and certainly instrumental music can be a spiritual practice. But I want to talk today especially about how singing in particular is a spiritual practice for me. First of all, you cannot sing without breathing. And if our breath is in fact the ruach, the spirit of God that gives us life, when I sing, I am more fully and intentionally inhabiting that breath. I also experience the vibration of that sound in my body in a way that is incredibly grounding and helpful. Singing helps us cultivate our capacity for listening, particularly when we're singing with others. How do we listen deeply? How do we blend our sound with the people around us? How do we pay attention to learn a song? And how does singing with other people cultivate both spiritual community and a physical sense of community? They say that when we make music together, that in fact, even our heartbeats will begin to attune. So that physical practice of unity, I believe, absolutely sets the stage for a spiritual experience of unity. Singing also is a practice of vulnerability and courage for all of us to open up our mouth and let sound out into the world is a huge exercise of vulnerability and courage, and those are essential spiritual practices for growth. There are times when singing is also cultivates a practice of obedience. If you're singing in a choir, you are to some sense obedient to what the composer has asked, obedient to what the choir director has asked, obedient to the vision of what you're creating together. There are other times when singing is also invites us into this spiritual practice of improvisation, which again is a creative and vulnerable space and a spiritual capacity we need to develop to be responsive in the world. And last but not least, I know no better way to absorb scripture and sacred text, to get it into my bones, to get it to be sort of that background tape playing in my mind while I sleep, while I work. They'll often say that at the end of our lives, as we might move into dementia and have lost access to so much communication and knowledge, that we may not even be able to hold a conversation. We may not even recognize our loved ones. But if someone starts singing a song that we know we'll be able to join. And so I know no better way to ensure that I continue to be able to pray into the end of my life than to get as much scripture and prayer text into my body as a song so that I can retain it. One of my favorite specific practices of song is chant. I personally wonder, if you could sing it, why wouldn't you? And so I invite you to play around with that practice with any text. You could do it with the phone book. You could do it with a children's book. You can absolutely do it with a Bible. And I'll often say to people, you can chant it all on one note, or you can chant it in a way that sounds really churchy, or you can chant in a way where you're making up your own tune. And so I'd invite you to take a little chunk of scripture and just play around with it in private. So chanting all on one note, monotone,
I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.
You can also chant using a tone that is traditional. The Orthodox Church has a number of traditional chanting tones. The Anglican Church has a number of traditional plain song chant tones. And often you'll know it by ear, even if you don't read music. But it might sound something like this.
I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.
And finally, you can create your own psalm tone or your own improvised melody that's in response to the meaning of the text. And it's just beautiful to start and see where it goes, and not necessarily always plan it in advance. So
I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.
there's no wrong way to do it, but it can absolutely bring familiar scripture to life in a new way if instead of reading it silently or even just reading it prosaically aloud, that you sing it and see what stands out and jumps out of the text in new ways when you're singing. Finally, I'll just share with you one community that's been incredibly formative to me when it comes to singing as a spiritual practice. And that is Music That Makes Community. And I can't seem to pull up the website, so you can just Google it, musicthatmakescommunity.org. And it is a beautiful ecumenical community of people convening around the practice of sharing music, teaching music by ear rather than first and foremost relying on printed music and composition. But again, it's a community that really believes in the formative power of making music together and how it forms us as people of faith and people of good conscience and people of justice, and forms us for leadership in ways that are about mutuality and shared leadership and vulnerability. And so I commend them to you as potential partners in as you grow in the spiritual practice of music making. Enjoy.